Hello, everybody. Welcome to another version, another iteration, another recording of Quaker Libertarian Conversations. Excited about today's topic and excited about my guest. Once again, my name is Matt Hisrich, and I'm here with Juliet Nail and Jared Warner, covering friends from across the country, across the spectrum, meeting minds and having exciting conversation about topics of relevance to hopefully Quakers and Libertarians, and maybe even people who aren't Quaker or Libertarian at all. I don't know. We're going to dive into it. Shortly, we're going to talk about communication and failure to communicate. Before we do that, we're going to center down for a moment. Okay, thank you. It's a brief centering, rapid centering, but hopefully it helps us find our space so that we can enter into deep spirit-led conversation. We shall see. Okay, so we touched on this at the end of our last recording. Jared kind of prompted us to think about how we are listening or not listening to one another. We can talk about that within the Quaker sphere. Of course, we've got, if you've ever seen branches of Quakers splitting off into all of our various subdivisions, those still exist today. And we continue to splinter. Of course, there have been splits in Northwest yearly meeting, and Indiana yearly meeting, and Wilmington yearly meeting, and North Carolina yearly meeting, people going off in various directions. This is just within the last 5 to 10 years, arguing about various things. And we seem to have trouble communicating even within our own bodies, much less across Quaker bodies. We see this within Libertarian Party, various factions forming, arguing with each other over the direction of the party, and certainly the broader political social landscape, increasingly finding it difficult to communicate with one another using language, but not really the same language, such that we're talking around each other. Are we seeing this? Are you seeing this where you are? Are you finding ways to address it? How might we draw upon our rich heritage among Quakerism or political thought to address it, be of service, and help to others? What do we think?
My meeting, so from a Quaker perspective, we actually are thinking about this and talking about this in my meeting right now, because we're getting ready to do the state of our meeting. And I actually think my meeting does a fairly good job of seeking alternative views. You know, I'm probably alone in my meeting. I remember one person, when I was doing some activism a few years ago, one gentleman was like, "You really need to come out with your political views." And so the response of the meeting was actually to give me a leadership position, and I'm on the M&C committee, right? So my meeting is trying. It's really heavily skewed one side politically, but I think there is a desire to do that. So I really appreciate that. I also think the Quaker concept of unity, both with, is a useful concept. If we look at unity, I don't know if your yearly meetings, or you ever heard of a yearly meeting having this as a testimony. It was in Pacific yearly meeting. But if we come at everything from that space of unity, it makes a difference. And I know that the Libertarians in Minnesota actually do a great job of this. We have everything from anarcho-capitalists to party members working within the Republican Party. And we all pretty much support each other, because there is this concept of unity. So that's my takeaway from Quakers to Libertarians. Let's meditate on unity.
I think along with that is the testimony of equality, that everybody has some sort of voice. And yeah, there's some people that may carry a little more weight as far as who we listen to, but everyone is able to speak in a Quaker meeting, and everyone has a voice, and we aren't supposed to make decisions quickly. So I think that equality factor is also very important with the unity. But I think the whole Quaker manner of business in the Quaker meeting is something that our society, from what I've seen in corporate world as well as church and other aspects, I think we need to examine that aspect of our spirituality and how it can affect other aspects of our lives.
Yeah, I would say, so for those who aren't familiar with the three of us, I'm coming out of the Friends United meeting tradition, and Jared's coming out of Evangelical Friends, and Juliet's coming out of Friends General Conference. So we're representing the kind of three different streams within contemporary American Quakerdom. And that was part of my hope for the Quaker Libertarians site, is that it could be this meeting place for people who have shared affinity across the spectrum of friends. And but I do recognize there's anybody who's familiar with the writer Peter Rollins, he will talk about this, where you get people that think or share somewhat similar ideas. They focus down on the minutia of what they agree upon and find what they disagree about. And to some extent, the people outside of libertarian circles or Quaker circles will look at us and say, why are you fighting? You're so close. Why can't you find some common ground? But you, as you narrow in on what is core to you, and I think that's part of it for libertarians and for Quakers, this has to do with core identity, core sense of belief. And it's the kind of thing that you don't want to give in on because it's so meaningful to you, and you're trying to express your views and values and beliefs in the public sphere to some extent. So how do you bridge this kind of desire to be true to yourself, and very common in both Quaker and libertarian circles, that as Jared said, there's doubt of God in me, and I have something I want to share with this idea of unity, and we all need to figure out how to hear that of everybody.
I'm wondering if anyone wants to summarize what is Quaker governance process. And I bet one of you can do it more succinctly than I can, so that folks understand, how that's related. For libertarians to understand how this is kind of a very libertarian anarchist type process, really. Mm-hmm. Anyone?
Go ahead, Matt. You're the educator.
Okay, well, how about I'll give my shot, and we'll see what the two of you have to say about it. But of course, it's going to vary in how it's practiced among various friends. But there is a non-hierarchical approach that tries to provide space for everybody to have a voice in decision making, and that there is an effort to not move forward with decisions until there is that unity that you spoke about, Juliet. And it doesn't mean that everybody has to agree that this is the right direction, but they do have to at least say, I understand this is where everybody wants to go, and I may not be in perfect alignment, but I do see that this is an okay way to go, and I'm ready to go forward, and then not going to continue to bring it up and say, I disagreed with this. So you might contrast this to, Robert's rules or majority voting, that kind of thing, where all you really need is 51% of the people to say, I want to do this, and you exclude that 49%, right? The idea is to have a much more inclusive process. It can take longer, but the goal is then to have a more cohesive sense in the group that we're going in the right direction, whatever the decision may be. Is that along the lines of what you're getting at?
I think so. I mean, it's kind of like the old filibuster in the Senate, right? Is everybody has a right to have their concerns addressed.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can stop the process and say, hey, we need to really consider and think about this. And then I like the way you described that, where you're, if you feel your concern's been addressed, you're likely to say, yes, I'm willing to step aside. The sense of the meeting is this. Where if they're not, the concern is not addressed, you're not going to step aside. So I don't know if there's other forms of consensus governance, but I've heard it called consensus governance, right?
I think that's a pretty good explanation of it. I say pretty good because it's hard to explain. so any explanation's pretty good. But it is, you're trying to get to what the sense, Juliet said, sense of the meeting. That's how I've always described it. It's not necessarily consensus. It's not unanimous necessarily. A lot of times it can be, but it is a sense that, yeah, this is the direction that we probably need to go at this time. And, you can make a decision and say, we do know that there's some factors that we haven't really addressed, so let's revisit this down the line and make a determined attempt to address those concerns before. And that gives us the ability to stand aside and know that, if what I was sensing in my spirit would be an issue, we can look at it. Maybe I'm totally off base and it's not going to be an issue, but we can try to move forward. But the thing that I like about it is we do all have a voice. We can be heard. If we have an issue with something, we can be heard, or at least express what is going on in us. And sometimes the answer comes from the least likely places. I'm a pastor. Evangelical friends have pastors, but I'm not the only leader in the church. What I say isn't what we're going to do. So, and it's a good thing, because sometimes I'm out there in left field sometimes, and it just doesn't make sense with what we have available to us at that time. But there are also things that come across that we have to deal with, where some of the answers come from, if it's a building type issue, some of the people that have the best ideas know nothing about buildings. They just say, wouldn't it be nice if we did this? And everybody's like, yeah, that would be good. Or sometimes, about 10 years, or I guess it's about 5 years ago, we had to put in a handicap access ramp. And it was a memorial fund. Once we got to doing things, we realized that, concrete isn't costing as much as we once thought it was. So we were able to present to the contractor, if we gave you this amount of money, how much of the parking lot could you make into concrete? And we were able to get 3/4 of what we wanted paved in our parking lot paved, just because we had a project for a wheelchair or handicap access ramp. We ended up with an entire parking lot that was paved. So, and that had nothing to do with the original discussion, but once we began to see outside of the box, we were able to come to a quicker decision. And that's one of the coolest things that have happened more recently in our meeting. So,
kind of pushing against what you could call a differential model of this person has all the money, or this person has all the training, therefore we're going to defer to their wisdom and experience. But to say, well, wait a minute, everybody has something to contribute. Then,
yeah.
okay. So I guess part of the tension for me then is, gosh, it seems like Quakers and Libertarians should be sort of guiding everybody else in how to have these conversations, and yet seem to have a real struggle coming to any kind of sense of consensus or unity. Pretty big questions. So what's up with that? And you can't say that this is entirely just a modern phenomenon, because of course, as I mentioned previously, Quakers have been splitting pretty much since they were founded. So, you know, what is it at the root of that, to use the tree analogy, desire to have unity and to hear all voices, and inability to come to shared agreement? And can we resolve it? Maybe we just can't, because that's part of human nature.
So for me, I'm questioning with some of these splits, are we, so I guess in the Quaker world, I'm not sure what all the splits are over. You guys are both more tuned into that, but my sense is there's splits on things like willingness to accept gay marriage or not. I think that's the big one, isn't it? Are there others? The
contemporary issue, there were splits over slavery. There were splits over like with what is now considered FTC is considered Hicksite. That was over theological views of the authority of Scripture or not. So kind of over and over and over again, there's something that comes up that people feel compelled to say, I cannot continue to be in unity with you, and we need to go our separate ways.
Okay, so there's been different topics. So I guess for me, I'm wondering with some of these splits, is it really irreconcilable, or is it a question of not centering? So for people that aren't Quakers, we center at the beginning of meeting. What we're doing or seeking to do is go into worship or into unity, kind of with each other, with the divine, so that we do better for all of you. So is it a lack of centering and seeking that unity? Is it a lack of definition, that they're not, you know, like maybe people, I'm just using the gay marriage thing, maybe people that think, okay, well, if these people aren't willing to accept gay marriage, then they're completely denying the humanity of these other people, which may or may not actually be true, and vice versa, right? So I guess I'm just questioning. I have no answers. I'm questioning, what is it? Is it definition? Is it lack of centering and unity?
I think kind of like with most arguments, if you were to go to marriage counseling or something like that, if we think about what is the number one issue that everyone has trouble with? Well, there's a surface issue. You know, number one argument among many couples that gets brought up most often is finances. Is that really the real issue? Well, the answer is no, it isn't. The issue that is probably dealing the most harm to a relationship is that there's assumptions being made that haven't been expressed. And we're not actually asking the same questions, or we're not asking the right questions, or we're assuming that everybody agrees with me and you haven't really confirmed that. So I think with a lot of the divisions is one group is making an assumption and another group's making an assumption, and we're not talking about the same things. You know, if one person in a relationship grew up with this person doing the dishes after a meal, and this one does the cooking, and this one does something else, and the other partner comes in and it's totally different how they grew up, and they both assume that everybody has done that their way the entire time, they're going to come to a stark reality when I don't like doing dishes. So, and somebody else is going to have to do it. So I think that's a lot of it, is we haven't asked the right questions of each other. So we're approaching these issues from totally different points of view, and we're not actually focusing in on what we're actually trying to accomplish. And that comes back to what you were saying, the lack of centering, for one thing. Are we focused on the issue that we really need to be focused on? And what is it that we're trying to answer?
I'm going to throw something out here and see what you both think. So I'll post a link on the video when we share it. But there's a post on the Quaker Libertarians blog about a concept called anarchic harmony, where it's an attempt to think about organizational structure among friends, but I think it could have broader implications that has to do with the kind of collective voice question, because I think that's underlying a lot of this, whether we're talking about Quakers, Libertarians, or Methodists, or Episcopalians, whatever that is, that seems to be part of the rub here. And that is speaking with authority on behalf of group X can be powerful if it represents a large number of people, right? And there is a sense that whether that's sort of missionally directed, what we can accomplish as a group together, or in terms of speaking truth to power, whatever, however you want to frame why you would be doing that, that we need to all be in agreement. And part of what I would, I guess, question, push against, again, whether we're talking about religious questions or theological questions or political questions, is that's sort of based on a flawed premise that you can actually get everybody to agree on a stance. And that instead, what if we looked at it where here are three Quaker Libertarians from different different backgrounds, different contexts, and we have found some alignment. What can we speak to as people who have this shared affinity, as opposed to speaking on behalf of all Quakers or all Libertarians, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And is that a workable solution, or does it just dissolve into nobody actually has any collective voice? I don't know. I do think that's part of it, because I know that what you get into in some of these splits is, I don't want to be unequally yoked to someone who doesn't see how I do, and that's holding back our ability to impact the world for God, or to move forward on this particular issue, that kind of thing.
Well, it's interesting because I'm thinking about things that separate the greater world, but don't separate in a libertarian concept, right? So like, I'm just thinking political stuff. So things like abortion, for instance, that's super divisive outside of libertarian circles. And within libertarian circles, you actually have a variety of views on that across the spectrum, but it's argued in a very subtle way. It's argued in from a perspective of individual rights, like when does the baby's right and the mother's right, when does one supersede the other? So it doesn't divide, where in the greater culture it divides, right? But in what divides libertarians? Libertarians get divided by, can you use the state or can you not use the state at all, right? So that's kind of interesting that what unites you and what separates you in different circles is completely different. And maybe that is because you have, in libertarian circles, we have a shared definition, maybe, I don't know about certain things and not others. Yeah, I don't know. I think actually, if you use the example of abortion outside of the circles of libertarianism, why is that so hot? That's so hot because the definition of life is different in each camp, right? They don't have the same semantic range, the word life. And we've kind of put that question aside in libertarian circles of what is life, and we're looking instead at individual rights and sovereignty. And And that's a discussion you can have, right? Whereas the definition of life, how do you debate the definition of life? That's such a personal thing. So I don't know, what do we do that in Quaker circles too? Do we kind of take off the hard, impossible contrast and ever switch it to things that you can actually bite off?
Excellent question. I don't know if there's an answer to that totally, but
Well, I think one that comes to mind right away is that of God in everyone, right? Like, so
yeah,
that gets used in Quaker circles a lot, and you can say, what do you mean by God? Because you and I could have very different views about that, but it does create space where you can build some commonality, even if you have wildly different understandings of the divine, of even Christian, non-Christian, all that kind of stuff. That there is some held space where you can move, you can sort of set that aside. I'm going to bracket that so we can work together on X, Y, Z.
Charles Schulz had a comic strip. Most of us know what it is, Peanuts comic strip. But in one of the comic strips, Snoopy was going to write a theological manifesto. and of course, Woodstock, in his way of speaking, is like, how are you going to do that? And he's like, I have the best title already. Have you ever considered that you might be wrong? And I, as I approach a lot of the questions that I'm asked as both a pastor and as a libertarian and all of that, I approach them like I may have an answer, but I'm open to the fact that I might be wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of people aren't open to that idea. You know, I have the right answer, and if you disagree with me, then you're wrong and I'm right, and we get divided on that. So when I approach a lot of discussions, I approach it as, is there another point of view that I'm not seeing? And can there be some truth in what they're saying? And how can we talk around that?
Oh,
And that was inspired.
You're absolutely right, Jared. But I think there's a tension in both libertarian and Quaker circles where there is this call to speak your truth, right? Like going naked as a sign among friends, walking into a church and saying, preacher, you're wrong. This is part of the Quaker tradition, and libertarians, call out the broader culture and say, like, wait a minute, wake up here. What is going on with military industrial complex or whatever the case may be? Like,
right.
And there is, like, how do you balance, because I think in some ways this is the kind of thing that would have, George Fox would have flown off the handle if you'd said, now, let's just consider all sides here, right? Instead of saying, no, I have a truth to share. And somebody like John Woolman, right, who sort of constantly battling against friends of his day to say, no, slavery is wrong. And how do you balance that call to witness with a humility to kind of see all sides? And I don't know, that seems tough.
So,
go ahead, Juliet. Sorry.
well, I guess wow. Okay, so that kind of brings up something. Thinking about being a libertarian in modern Quaker circles, no matter what tradition you're in, you're a minority. So I think, like Jared, I think in your meeting, you have what the greater culture would call conservative and liberal. Most of the meetings that I've been, it's more what the greater culture would call liberal. And so I think a lot of us just don't say anything sometimes. And so I guess what I'm hearing you say is, even if we're wrong, yes, we need to do what Jared's saying is, yeah, I might be wrong, but this is the truth that I'm discerning from, whether if it is a discerned, quieted message that we have centered on, and we're supposed to speak out of the light, we have to say that. And we have to not be afraid to say it, even if nobody else believes it. And I don't know. So maybe it's, we have to go into that light and that silence and discern more and speak from the truth instead of speaking from our mind, but speak from the light. I don't know.
When I bring that up, Matt, and I fully agree with your assessment of what I said, that yeah, George Fox would probably fly off the handle, but and George Fox would fly off the handle on a lot of things, but he's a very charismatic person. But when I say I might be wrong, is I'm trying to think about, yes, I know what most everyone that thinks like me thinks about, and is there a question that we haven't asked that is really going to change our perspective? And that's the one that's the truth that I would speak is, have we thought about things this way? What does it mean? Past couple of weeks, my messages was Jesus cleansing the temple. What makes God angry in that case? What is it about the merchants being in the temple that made God angry? Is it the merchants or the market? Is it something else? Or is it that there's exploitation going on? What is it in our lives that is causing issues? And how are we limiting access to something greater? And last week, what is the concept of being born again? Is it the turning? Is it, we have these definitions that we've grown up with. Could there be more to it? And, and today is about a grain of wheat dying to bear fruit. And I think all three of those messages kind of come together because we get caught up in this individualism, which is important because that's how we're going to take care of ourselves. But there is something beyond just us. And how are we interacting with everything? And that's where I see the libertarians saying, I may have a view on a certain topic that everyone's debating on, but that doesn't give me the right to tell you how you should think. I'll just explain what I think in as many as clearly as I can, and then help you make your own decision.
Yeah, I think you're onto something, and I think I like what Juliet was saying there too. That if we take seriously the idea that we may have something of God's to share with others, that it's not ours, right? Like we don't have ownership of that. We give it to others, and they may or may not heed, but we don't have to. That doesn't have to be sort of tied up with our individual identity. And I think that's part of what maybe is going on in a lot of these situations where, like I'm so invested in more or less winning my perspective that it causes me to not be able to see the humanity of the person in front of me that disagrees. And if you are able to give it up and give it over, and not carry that in the same way, carry it a little bit more lightly, right? It doesn't mean that you give away your own belief and identity, but it's not tied into winning this argument or converting this person to your perspective.
And I think that's a lot of it. We want to win, and who doesn't like winning? I'm going to go watch a hockey game. I would like my team to win, but they haven't been winning the last few. So, but I would like for them to win. It wouldn't be a fun game if there was no winning available. But I think I like what you said about, am I able to see the humanity of the person that's disagreeing with me? And that's where, we see memes all over the internet about different political things, and it's like, well, yeah, remember there's a person at the end of that. So, and how are we actually encouraging that person? Are they encouraged to rely on somebody else? Are they encouraged to figure out how to make things work? Are we assisting them in figuring things out, or are we just enabling them to continue in a bad course of decision making? And that's one of the struggles I think that we as humans have to deal with is, are we enabling, are we contributing to their harm, or are we encouraging them to something better? And when I look at a lot of the divisions, I just see a lot of questions that haven't been answered that people are asking, and they're just they're not heard.
Yeah.
And I think that when I get into one of those arguments, that's what I ask. Have you thought about this yet? Or what about this? And, I was faced with a question about the abortion issue. What if somebody needed a kidney and you were forced to give them your kidney? You have two. Is that legal or is it illegal? And I was like, I haven't listened to that topic or that version of I hadn't seen that side of that conversation before. And I actually had to say, thank you for bringing that up. It doesn't change my mind necessarily, but it is something that I have to think about. And it was profound for me. So, there's a lot of other sides of the story that a lot of these debates aren't listening to.
Well, I totally agree. I think we are approaching the end of our time. Juliet, do you have last words for us?
Well, a couple. I think from the libertarian perspective, some of this comes down to that conflict between the individual and the collective, and sometimes I think it's almost a false dichotomy, because Quaker process, I just think there's an easy synthesis. You always have to protect the right of the individual, and you have to give voice and address the concerns of every individual. But we're collective beings, and I think sometimes as libertarians we forget that. And then the other thing, I love what you said about both of you about the seeing the humanity in each other, and we talk about that of God, but I think it comes down to seeing the divinity and the humanity in ourselves, because that's our highest and our lowest, and then the humanity and divinity in each other. And it's somehow taking that time to do that. So that's my take.
Okay, well, hopefully we've taken some time to do that today, and it'll be interesting to hear thoughts from others as they review what we've shared. And otherwise, we will see you all next time.